I've been writing about and investigating UFOs for well over 20 years, and most of that time I've been employed full time to do that work. I've written dozens of articles, I've been on many UFO programs, and I'm often interviewed by news outlets. Claims from credible witnesses of incredible things have inspired me to keep an open mind to the extraordinary possibilities when it comes to the nature of UFOs, often referred to as UAP when it comes to scientific investigation. The goal of this podcast is to provide credible news and information to ground this cosmic conversation. Welcome to Open Minds UAP News. First, we'll get into the news and Congress. Supposedly, this is UFO week, but there's been some confusion, and we'll get into that. But then I'm also going to go over the story of the alleged Area 51 whistleblower, the guy who made Area 51 famous. However, he has a secret history that has been hidden from you by his proponents and the people who have been reporting on him, which I think is, again, I use this word a lot, irresponsible, because if you're a reporter, you call yourself a reporter or an investigative reporter, you're supposed to share all sides of things, especially when you've got a person with some extraordinary claims to cover up, or at least not to cover, this person's credibility or lack thereof is irresponsible. And so I'm going to cover that for you. And we're going to go over some of why I do not believe Bob Lazar, and I and others who are skeptical of Bob Lazar, the alleged Area 51 witness, are absolutely justified to be so. And, a lot of people want to hate on you and say, oh, you big jerk, you don't believe Bob Lazar. Well, I'm going to share with you why I don't believe him, and I've got receipts. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's get into the news. All right. So again, Ask a Poll and Matt Lazar. This is the best reporting that's coming out of what's going on in Congress. That, Matt Lazar is there on the Hill every day asking these Congress people about what's going on and getting some really interesting stuff. And so why do I say confusion? Because there was some reporting that there was supposed to be another hearing on UAP this week, but then that got countered and we were told no. Plus, a lot of people that have been in Congress that have been talking about this topic are just gone completely silent. That may not be surprising, given the news of the last episode that I shared with you all on how this image was shared at that event and quickly debunked. Also, some really wild claims were kind of thrown out there that were not substantiated. And that coupled together causes major credibility problems. And I'm sure embarrassment for some of those Congress members who have been supporting this topic. When there are really wild claims made and the evidence to support them is debunked immediately, that doesn't bode well for that sort of thing. However, Representative Eric Burleson is someone who has been talking to Matt Lazar and who has been pushing this forward. In fact, he did schedule some meetings, including, the alleged whistleblower, Mr. Grush here. And, some people have said that I was wrong in claiming that he didn't have firsthand evidence. We don't know that he does have any firsthand. When he talked to Congress, he talked about other people gave him information when he was looking for information on this topic. He did not say he had any firsthand information. Later on, when he talked to the media, he had said he had firsthand information. But what is that? We don't know. One of the problems I see with that is, for instance, there was this Project Kona. A lot of people talking about, there was this back engineering program. Well, when we found out about that program, it was a suggested program. It was not created. And the reason it never got off the ground is because the alleged evidence they were supposed to look into, physical evidence of, materials made elsewhere, was never provided because it just didn't exist. It was, once again, these promises of this evidence that just never comes to fruition, and it never happens. And if they are talking about some of the cases that I'm aware of where this group who alleges this kind of stuff purports as mysterious, it's not mysterious, and it's been demonstrated as something that could be and probably is man-made. And so it wasn't, again, not surprising to me, and people get upset because I've said all along for years now not to expect anything from this group, and I've been right because nothing has come to fruition. And I wish it would. I really do want it to, but I was right at the beginning to be skeptical, to temper my expectations, to temper your expectations as my audience. And, I just been proven more and more right as nothing happens. But there is some movement going on here, and this is kind of exciting. On the one hand, David Grush was brought into a skiff. Lou Elizondo was not able to make it to this meeting, I guess. These people, just if you're not aware, Lou Elizondo was the guy to come out in the New York Times article in 2017 to claim that he worked for this program, OSAP, or he called it ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It turned out that wasn't really an official program that we're aware of, that this was actually kind of a spin-off kind of group, that, and the nickname that was used for the original program, which Lou wasn't a part of, allegedly. Sometimes he says he is, sometimes he says he isn't, but that's the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Application Program. That organization, which was created partially by Robert Bigelow, a guy who's promoted paranormal stuff, unsubstantiated paranormal stuff for decades out of Las Vegas. He funded these other scientific investigations, and it was his Bigelow Aerospace organization, that kind of a division of it, that took over the contract for this OSAP organization, which was an official group, Pentagon program. However, it was to look into advanced aerospace weapon systems, not paranormal stuff, which they took it upon themselves to do anyway. And that all ties into this, because who is Grush? Grush is a guy who worked for the UAP task force. A lot of those OSAP people who worked with Bigelow came and then started another organization under naval intelligence called the UAP task force. That's where Grush comes from. This is why I have doubts, because his roots are the same roots. He's getting his information from these people who have been pushing poor data and information and not substantiating their claims. That's why I didn't think Grush would substantiate his claims, which he hasn't. And we're actually going to get into this quite a bit today, because yet again, all of this UFO mythos goes back to these people who believe it when they shouldn't. And they're the people who, above all, shouldn't. And I'll be demonstrating that in just a minute. But getting back to the news, Grush was in this meeting. I don't know what has come of it yet. We don't have much information on that. However, Grush said he had to go home and he couldn't be part of other meetings that were scheduled for the week. Again, very mysterious, because he's hired by this committee to do this work, but because he doesn't have clearance and other issues, he had to get back home. This does not bode well for the credibility. However, one of those meetings that was supposed to happen was a meeting between the FBI and AARO and which is the Pentagon's new program, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, which is the Pentagon organization and doesn't have roots or a background working with the Bigelow Group. In fact, those two groups have been butting heads. They just see things very differently. And I really kind of think that, although they're not perfect by any means, AARO is kind of at least taking more of a more credible scientific look at things, although they're really not sharing much. And I don't expect the Pentagon to share a lot. But anyway, the FBI did meet with AARO supposedly, and it was a great conversation. Again, we know this from Askapol and Matt Laszlo. So they say, buckle up. There was different material that the FBI had that has shared with AARO. And that's really exciting. I've actually talked to this FBI group. I've talked to at least the guy who says he created this FBI. Here, Matt Laszlo calls it a UAP division. I wouldn't say it's so much that. It's mostly a group of people who are interested, who have permission to look into this, especially looking at it from a crime perspective. Are some of these drones, criminal activity from American citizens or others? for instance, is the type of thing they're looking into, or if there's any other criminal activity that's happened, and that's what they're looking at. It's not a two-way thing. They have not shared any information with me, and have kind of said that's not going to happen. But really, they've wanted my take and see if I have some information on some stuff or can connect them with people who can investigate some of the stuff they're looking into, all of which I'm more than happy to do. Um, and this has been just completely independent. They gotten a hold of me through Open Minds because they've seen my work and wanted to get a hold of Open Minds to find out what we would be able to do to help them. But yeah, that's great that Burleson is trying to connect Arrow with the FBI so that they can work together. I think that's wonderful. I just hope that going forward, we do have some sort of transparency here, that we do have a component of this where they can share information with the public. On that note, this is actually pretty interesting. And to be honest, now that I think about it, it kind of makes me wrong. I just said we probably won't get anything from the Pentagon, although we did get something from the Pentagon, albeit it was only via X, no official paper on it. But this came out on May 9th, about a week ago, where they said that they had 8 minutes and 15 seconds of video footage that was captured on an infrared sensor aboard a U.S. platform in the Middle East in 2023 and later reported to Arrow as a UAP. The report remains unsolved as the available data does not support a conclusive analytic evaluation. And then they shared this video. So take a look at this. Now, just because they can't solve it doesn't mean that it's anomalous. And, hopefully more analysis will happen. Unfortunately, they're covering up a lot of the telemetry or data that would be helpful as far as figuring out, the height and the distance and what time of day, all of this kind of stuff that would be important for analysis. But yeah, just something. You remember this is IR, so this is probably white hot, meaning that this is the hot part of this object, whatever it is, that we're able to see that is round. It doesn't necessarily mean the object itself was this shape, but just a hot part of it, or the propulsion, like, for instance, the jet from a jet engine. So just not enough information to figure this one out yet, but really interesting. And I hope they give us a more of a report and some more information and data on this. I haven't seen anything on the Arrow website on this case yet. The only thing that we've got is what's here on this X post. So a lot to look forward to hear more about what happened in those meetings this week. I hope that they're able to share something. We'll see if there's any hearings that happen going forward. And hopefully we'll get some more information on this Arrow case. So something to look forward to. So the next part, I don't have an interview. Instead, I'm going to evaluate some information for you. And like I said earlier, this is around the alleged whistleblower of Area 51. So what's really funny about this is that Area 51 was our kind of most secret base. But in the late 80s, when this whistleblower came forward, and KLAS out of Las Vegas covered this person's claims, it became very popular, super famous, and all of a sudden, Area 51 has kind of become our most famous base as opposed to the most secretive. And what's really interesting is that for many years, while I was looking into this, for instance, it was top secret. They wouldn't even confirm the name Area 51 or that it existed. They also call it the Groom Lake facility because that's the name of the dry lake bed that the facility is on in outside of Las Vegas in Nevada, administered largely by Nellis Air Force Base, but originally created by the CIA with Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And this is where we know what's been going on there. This is where they built like lots of our stealth, or at the beginning, they built the U-2 aircraft, which was a very low signature aircraft that could fly super high, and it would be able to take pictures of, like, say, Russia and stuff like that. Or the SR-71, which was kind of the same thing, to take photos that could travel extremely fast and extremely high. So no missiles or anything could shoot it down, and we can kind of take pictures of things wherever we want, and nobody could do anything about it. That was the whole point. So it's really popular to believe there's something going on with this. And the Bigelow Group mostly believe this this guy, this guy who claims there were aliens and alien spacecraft at Area 51. And it's unfortunate because I think there's a lot of reasons that we shouldn't believe in this Bigelow group. And I call this the Bigelow group because I'm talking about people like the people at the hearing. Eric Davis is a scientist who's worked with Bigelow all the way back, many years in his first organization, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences. He also worked in OSAP. Another person is Dr. Hal Puthoff. This is kind of the main science guys who has also worked with that organization for a long time. Hal Puthoff has also worked in other fringy things like psychic phenomena with the Stanford Research Institute and the CIA many, many years ago. And this is where the UAP task force comes from. And you start to hear some of the UFO mythos that this organization or these people with this organization really believe and hold as some of the linchpins to, their belief system and what they believe is going on. But really, kind of like I've said in the past, it's a house of cards. And one of their major witnesses is this Bob Lazar guy who claims that, these UFOs at Area 51, he's one guy with a set of wild claims. He hasn't been able to substantiate any of it, but they still stand by his claims. But here's the problem. Another person who's worked in this Bigelow group with this group very closely is George Knapp. So when I've talked about all of these guys, I've mentioned him a lot because he's an investigative reporter with KLAS. He wrote the original Hunt for the Skinwalker book because he was part of those, or at least got to observe those investigations that Robert Bigelow did in this ranch in Utah. Of course, some of you are familiar with the TV show they have on this ranch where allegedly all of this weird stuff happens. George Knapp also co-wrote the book then that the DIA agent in charge of OSAP wrote called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which is also about all of this stuff. And he is the guy who really made Bob Lazar popular. The very first interview was with KLAS. George Knapp then picked up that story and has been interviewing and working with Bob Lazar for many years. Now, my personal experience, I've known George Knapp for quite some time. He's been somewhat of a mentor for me. I think a lot of his reporting is great. And for me, when I first got into this, I've always been on the fence with Bob Lazar, but I was like, you know what? George has got this. George is a great, investigative reporter. He's all over this. I'm sure he's got this. But when I started looking into Bob Lazar, there were some very glaring problems. And the first one I'm not going to cover in detail because even UFO researchers who believe Bob Lazar also believe he's a liar. Huge red flag, huge problem right from the get-go because Bob Lazar claims to have these secondary degrees at these universities that he never went to. It just never happened. It's completely false. You can look more into this. I'll show you a little bit about it. But the reason I'm not going to cover it too much is because his main proponents, his main people pushing that he's real, such as George Knapp himself, doesn't believe this either. And I'm going to prove that to you in a second. The other person who's in the news quite a bit is Jeremy Corbell. He calls himself an investigative reporter, but he doesn't really dig too deep into his cases because they're often debunked very quickly. He gets them out there before there has been a sort of consensus or where a group of people has looked at this and agreed, and he may disagree with that, but he hasn't demonstrated that. He hasn't demonstrated this transparent kind of examination, nor does he present the information as, here's something that could be this or that. Let's all, as a community, take a look at that and go over that. Kind of like Jason McClellan and I reviewed recently in one of these shows, like we always do, we try to do. That's being responsible. That's, also research, it's something that we all have to do together, and we can't be definitive without having that sort of acknowledgement and getting, the people who are experts in their certain fields to be able to look at and verify some of this information. So Jeremy Corbell does these documentaries. He's done a documentary on Bob Lazar also, but this is the problem. I'm going to cover a whole history of lies to demonstrate that Bob Lazar lies on a regular basis. And I'm not even going to be able to scratch the surface. I'll give you resources where you can read more, but I'm going to cover the stuff with receipts. This is also the difference between a lot of the reporting from others that you get and a lot of the claims from others that you get. They don't come with receipts, they are unsubstantiated. I'll provide you receipts for everything that I'm talking about, and I'm going to cover the points that come with receipts. Let's get into this. But from the beginning, just to establish this and just to kind of move past it, I think I'll go with George Knapp first. So let's get into this. This is Douglas Dean Johnson who posted this, and I highly, highly recommend that you follow him. If you're on X, he's at D Dean Johnson. Great researcher, very careful in his research. He's actually, believe it or not, less skeptical than I am about a lot of this stuff. He is very grounded, careful researcher. He also has a website you can see here, douglasjohnson.ghost.io. I would highly, highly recommend you follow him. He's got some great work, great insights, and he's got some great connections in Washington, D.C., where he's able to get some scoops out there as well. But this is something he reported because he's very frustrated about the Bob Lazar situation and that these guys, especially George Knapp, has not been really covering him well. But this is a rare instance where George Knapp admits that Bob Lazar is lying about his educational credentials and that he didn't, as he claims, have a degree from Caltech and MIT. He claims that he has like master's degrees from these organizations. Not true. He's lying right off the bat. Now, I, being who I am, expressed my skepticism to George Knapp when I started looking into this to say, look, it doesn't look like he really has these educational credentials that he claims. And George Knapp admitted to me that's true, and he doesn't believe that he does either, and that he's confronted Bob Lazar about it, but that Bob Lazar won't change his story, even though it's just obviously false. He did tell me, though, that he had information that substantiates Bob Lazar's story. He understood why I and others would be skeptical. It's just unfortunate that he can't share all the information he knows that does substantiate Bob Lazar. That is very unfortunate if that is the case. But there are major other problems, though, that really cast doubt. But first, let's take a look at this. This is George Knapp admitting this at a conference.
Identified him. We said we could not verify his background. And I will confide to you this. I don't believe he ever went to those schools. I don't believe Bob Lazar could get a degree from Caltech or MIT for a very simple reason. At American universities, when you get a degree, an undergraduate degree, you have to take all kinds of core courses in subjects that you may not be interested in. Literature. I cannot possibly imagine, and Anna, Bob, I can't imagine Bob Lazar sitting through a class in American Lit or reading poetry or something like that.
Yeah.
He'd never stand for it.
Not a great argument. So right off the bat, admitting to a lie, which is a pretty big deal for a guy claiming to be a scientist who worked at Area 51 and having all of these science jobs. But it's not just him. I think, Tim T, this guy did a really good, I think this is a fair video. Of course, he takes some clips of an interview, a debate that I was the one moderating between Stanton Friedman, a very well-known UFO researcher and an actual physicist, and Jeremy Corbell, where Jeremy was many would say pretty rude, and I think he was. Now, many people kind of come to me, why did you let Jeremy be such a jerk to Stanton Friedman? But I'll let you know, Stanton Friedman was a good friend of mine. I knew him well. He loved to debate. It was one of his favorite things, even debating with me, because we disagreed about things. And whenever I said, I want to debate you about something, he was just very excited to do it. And with others. He famously debated Seth Shostak from the SETI Institute often. And I think both of them got a real kick out of that. But this, I think, is a very revealing video on this very topic we're talking about.
A little lie? Well, guess what? A little lie is actually a big lie. I'm saying Bob is lying about having degrees from MIT and Caltech.
Okay, great. You've never lied to get a chick? Got a little lie? Well, guess what? A little lie is actually a big lie.
If a person
Surprise.
lies, why should you believe what he
Right.
says about
Totally.
anything?
You got a little lie? Well, guess what? A little lie is actually a big lie. Is that what you're saying?
My point is Bob lied deliberately and without a doubt about his credentials.
Okay, well, I'm not sure about that he lied deliberately and without a doubt, but you're sure about
By
that.
accident?
I'm happy to clarify it. I'm not going to accuse the chairwoman of lying.
It's probably
lying involves intent.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So I don't know that there was that.
It's politically smart of you to not obviously accuse her of lying. He lied about his education. I don't even care. A little lie? Well, guess what? A little lie is actually a big lie.
I'm saying Bob is lying about having degrees from MIT and Caltech.
Okay, great. I don't care about the degrees. I care about the bigger topic. A little lie? Well, guess what? A little lie is actually a big lie. He lied about his education. I don't even care. What?
Well, you should care, because the whole point is that, you're basing a lot of your belief system off of this claim. Absolutely, it should matter if he's lying. So that's lie number one. And that's the one that's on the table here. So people can't even argue. We have Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, the guys that are pushing his story the most, admitting to this being a lie, and Jeremy admitting to not even caring, which is unfortunate. Now, the rest of this information I'm going to go over. I've investigated myself and gotten some documentation. However, a lot of it also comes from these two sources, which are really, really good sources. This one is called otherhand.org. It's ran by a guy named Tom Mahood. There's a little bit of an information on him on the website, but he is an actual engineer and scientist. He's worked in civil engineering. He's worked for different organizations, including Caltech, and he kind of begrudgingly tackled this issue and put together a really great timeline of Lazar, and then goes into some of the information where Lazar has either been inaccurate or some of the major red flags that I'm going to cover here. Another one is signal intelligence, and he has right here, medium.com at signals intelligence. Also, he has this Papoose Lake Institute, papooselake.org, where he has a very robust timeline. And he also has original interviews with people who knew Bob Lazar. I'm not even going to get into these, although they're very insightful. And really, they paint the picture of a guy who is just not trustworthy. And maybe it's just that he can't work for others, but where he had a very low work ethic, where he was using company property or resources for personal things that he wasn't supposed to be doing. Just how and how he really hopped from job to job because he wasn't a very person of high integrity or someone who had a great work ethic. Not to say that's not the truth now. Now it seems like he is a hard worker. He has his own company and all of that. But at the time he wasn't. But let's get into the timeline. And this starts with when he became an adult. So essentially his first marriage. He got married. Here's his marriage certificate here. I'll put links to all of this, of course, in the show notes. But he got married to a woman named Carol Nadine Strong, and he married her in October of 1980. You see here that she was actually 15 years older than him, or let's see, I'm doing the math wrong, 13 years older, so she was quite a bit older than him. So what's the big deal? You know, he marries an older woman, not a big deal. But the first red flag, and this is, as we go on, we'll see where it gets more troublesome. This woman he married has a history of at least being associated with possible drug sales and drug use, also with the Hells Angels. And she was with this group of Hells Angels and actually participated in essentially an abduction and a murder. Pretty scary stuff. here's the story. Here's the person that was murdered. His name was Dennis Dominic Passerio. As you can see here in this Find a Grave site where it talks about his death, you can see he was murdered, shot, and stabbed in his home by Gary Louise Burkett and his wife, Victoria E. O'Brien. They actually, according to news reports, which we'll see here, we've got some clippings on the Signals Intelligence site. I've also found some others independently where that talk about this, but here we go. Carol Nadine Esslinger, which is her maiden name. She was sentenced for this murder. And essentially, she was part of this, where she went to the house with them. She took one of the people at the house into another room and held them at gunpoint while her friends in the other room killed this man. And so she went to jail for it. We don't know how long she went to prison. I haven't found records on that, but she went to prison for that. The other thing was she was arrested in 1974 when she was caught in a truck with a 15-year-old boy and drug paraphernalia and stolen goods. So she had a really difficult background. Does that mean that she had, not recovered and her and Bob were fine and there was no more crime that went on? There's no evidence of that. So maybe she was, but still, I think this shows a little bit of a problem. Or right off the bat, he's marrying this person who is, was involved with a murder and went to prison for a long period of time. And as far as I know, it looks like Bob had kind of your regular, normal upbringing and the middle class and no sort of like sketchy kind of background. So after he gets married, how does it go? Well, if we look at his book, Dreamland, this is just recently a foreword by George Knapp, you see here, an autobiography by Bob Lazar. This came out in 2019, so fairly recent. And in the book, if you look at, well, how did it go? He said, life seemed to be pretty good after I got married in the 80s. They had a photo business where they were doing a 1-hour photo kind of shop in Los Alamos, where apparently he had other work as well. And in fact, it's well known that he did work at the Los Alamos, labs out there for a short period of time. He claimed that he was working for the labs themselves in the Navy, but his records were, I'm not even covering this part. His records seem to be faked. They're just demonstrably fake. He didn't work for the Navy. Who he did work for was this group called KM. He was essentially a contractor, and he worked there for a short period of time. He was an electrical technician, is what most of the reports say. He says he was like an electrical physicist or something. Absolutely false. There's no evidence of that. He didn't have the credentials to be that. But he's obviously smart when it comes to science. So the technician part seems to fit. Some people argue that, he was just a contractor. He could have been a janitor, and he could have been. We don't know, but he does have demonstrably some science knowledge and has the capability of doing more and capability of being an electrical technician, which is what likely he was, and that what other coworkers and others have reported that he was. But here's where the lies begin. He said the photo business was Carol's to oversee. So that was a photo business that he and she ran together. But he said, we also invested in a legalized brothel in Las Vegas that was taking in $100,000 a month called the Honeysuckle Ranch. Well, others have looked into this, including Signals Intelligence, including speaking to historians that know about the legal brothels in Las Vegas. There was no legal brothel called the Honeysuckle Ranch at all. That seems to be completely made up, probably made up because at the time he was living very lavishly. He even talks about how one of his indulgences was to buy this Chevrolet Corvette. But his money wasn't coming from a brothel. In 1986, Bob Lazar had to file bankruptcy, and those bankruptcy documents are readily available. Here they are, in fact. And he says in 1986, at the time, he wasn't making any money. So it does show here he was self-employed, his own company, running a photo development company at the time of, and this is at the time of the bankruptcy. So he was self-employed, but he, on this document, claims he wasn't making any money. He had no income coming in. But more importantly, when we look at that period in the 80s, from 83 to here's 85, 84, 86, he was borrowing money. These are all of the loans and debts that he could not fulfill. So this is the money he was borrowing. In some cases, 50,000, 80,000 from banks, or that was his mortgage, but here's from bank 60,000, 10,000. Here's how much he had been able to pay back. In this case, 1,000, 2,000 on $50,000. So he was obviously having problems. It also goes into an abundance of personal loans he was taking from family members that were also large figures that he wasn't able to pay back. So he was taking tons and tons of money out. The Corvette repoed. He wasn't able to pay it. He only paid like $600 on it, and it got repoed, all in this documentation. He bought another car that is also kind of famous, a Honda, that he kind of turned into a jet car. That was also something that was part of this bankruptcy that he was not able to pay back. So he wasn't living large off of this brothel he allegedly bought into, which seems to be a complete lie because there's no records of that. In a later document, we'll look at a list of where his income came from, an official document, and he did not list a brothel in that. And you know, it wouldn't make sense that at the time that he's raking in $100,000 from a brothel, he's also taking out all of these loans from friends and families and banks that he later has to go into bankruptcy because he can't pay them back. Just a lie. I mean, it just seems to be a complete lie. What's interesting then is that he says he stayed in Los Alamos working while his wife bought a house, Carol, and moved to Las Vegas. So she's living in Las Vegas. He's in Los Alamos. Well, interestingly, in 1986, April of 1986, he up and leaves all of a sudden. And there's even an article in the Los Alamos News about this. So here's the headline, that this UPS shop closes and boxes left behind. So in this article, it talks about how this business just up and leaves. It names the business, and it is the business that Bob Lazar and his wife owned, and where they were doing photo development and apparently also accepting UPS packages or doing UPS delivery. He just up and left. So when the owner, the landlord, went into the property, there were UPS packages still there. There was film there that hadn't been delivered to the customers. So he had to call all of these people and say, hey, come pick up your packages or come pick up your photos. And then some people they weren't able to find. And so he was left with these packages that he eventually, I guess, gave to the police. But just Bob Lazar disappears. But it gets really strange or much more weird after that because his wife ends up killing herself. In the book, let's go take a look at that. He essentially says that he was kind of pushed into this relationship with one of their employees named Tracy. And that it turned out his wife was hiding from him that she had cancer. I don't know if any of that is true. Questionable, I think, given his background. He says that, you know, Carol had set into motion the events that led to him marrying Tracy soon after Carol's death. A lie. But he says about Carol's death is that he kept trying to tell her, you seem sick and you got to take care of yourself, but that she wasn't. Then he says that she waited for him to leave the house to run a few errands, and then she sat behind the wheel of her car in the garage and ended her life. So while he was out getting errands, she killed herself, he says. Very sad situation. However, the problem with that is that he told the police something completely different. So here's her police report. It says that she actually died on the 19th, but that the death wasn't reported until the 21st. When we look at the coroner's report, and it's all written right here, but on the Signals Intelligence, he's kind of transcribed it so you could read it better. But he said, this is what he told the police, that the husband reported finding the victim as described at 7:30 a.m. following his return from out of state. The husband reports talking with the deceased by telephone on Saturday, the 19th. The weapon was purchased by the husband for the victim because they found a gun next to her when she was dead. She didn't use it. There were no gun wounds. But it says the husband states that they had have marital difficulties and that the deceased was talking about suicide. So he doesn't put this in the book, that his wife was suicidal and he was out of town when this occurred. But there's even bigger problems, because if we go back and we look at his marriage licenses, on the 19th, he got married to Tracy in Las Vegas, Nevada. And here's the marriage license for it. April 19th, 1986, Robert Lazar and Tracy Ann Merck married in Las Vegas. He was married. He was already married to Carol. They hadn't canceled their divorce. He marries this other woman on the 19th. His wife then kills herself on the 21st. And it gets worse. He then moves in to the house his wife Carol killed herself at with his new wife Tracy. And it gets worse. It always gets worse with Bob Lazar. So this is according to the police report. So either Bob Lazar is lying somewhere. He's either lying, first of all, he got married. He's lying about that he got married to a woman when he was already married to another woman. Obviously, there were marital problems, some major marital problems. On the day of his marriage to Tracy, he talks to his current other wife, who's at the house in Las Vegas. He doesn't go to the house till a couple days later, then allegedly finds her dead. In his book, he glosses over this completely and tells a different version of this story where he was out for errands and he came back and she's dead, and that he didn't marry Tracy until a few months later, which is kind of true, but actually also a lie. Because if we go look back at these marriage licenses, there's yet another one. And it does show that he got married again in October of 1986. He married a woman named Jackie Diane Evans. Now, who was that? That's Tracy. So Tracy was wanted in New Mexico, or at least she was on probation for a crime, a fraud that she committed against a bank that she was working for, where she was writing fraudulent checks, or got busted writing a fraudulent check to the bank. And so she was on probation, not supposed to leave the state. She left the state to move to Las Vegas to get married. And for that reason, she went under an alias, the alias of Jackie Diane Evans. All of this are major credibility issues. He's lying. He's around, and obviously him and the people around him just lie. And he allegedly had a secret clearance where he could work at the most secretive base that the United States has on the most secretive project. It makes no sense. Major credibility problems, major red flags. Again, I haven't even scratched the surface of this. But let's move on. In 1988, he meets John Lear in Las Vegas. And this is where the UFO stuff begins. Because up until now, we haven't even talked about UFOs. He has nothing to do with UFOs. He's just, borrowing money that he can't pay back. And and buying cars and living lavishly and being married to two women at the same time for a few days, allegedly owning this brothel that never exists, or there's no evidence that existed at all, but nothing to do with UFOs. That wasn't until he met John Lear. So John Lear famously is the son of the Learjet guy, and a real wild conspiracy guy. John Lear's the king of conspiracy, has all of these just really out there ideas. And Jeremy Corbell has actually done a documentary on John Lear. I've talked about this before on this show. That documentary called The Immaculate Deception. I showed you the website for that and talked about it in the last show. Well, Bob Lazar becomes buddies with John Lear in 1988. And what's interesting is that there is a calendar that Bob Lazar kept. And later that calendar was discovered by the police. So in an interview, along with another gentleman that he met at this time, who kind of became his right-hand man, Gene Huff, they talk about the details that go through this calendar. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this calendar. But in this calendar, you then see that Bob Lazar is interacting with John Lear, with Gene Huff, Linda Moulton Howe, some other UFO people that he's meeting, and he's getting into all of this UFO stuff at this time. Gene Huff is another interesting character because him and Bob Lazar are really tight. I had my own experience with them that raised a red flag with me. So I used to run the International UFO Congress, which was owned by Open Minds at the time. And at the time, my boss really wanted to get Bob Lazar as a speaker. From the get-go, he believed Bob Lazar's story and really wanted to get him. I, of course, was skeptical, but look, I wanted to make it happen. This was my boss, and so I worked really hard to make that happen. And I had talked with George Knapp quite a bit to make that happen. At one point, it was suggested, perhaps for the right price, that Bob Lazar would do it. I've been asked not to discuss that price. Other people have, but I won't do that because I was asked not to. But anyways, we met the right price, and we were able to get Bob Lazar to come speak at the conference. But Gene Huff had to be there. And Gene Huff said, I need to have some alone time with Bob Lazar before he speaks because I have to help him remember everything that happened. And I was like, huh? And I probably made a funny look because Gene goes, he doesn't always remember the details, so I have to help him with that. Why does a third party have to help him remember his own memories and the things that happened to him? Huge red flag there. But anyway, I've also got this link that I'll add to where John Lear is talking about, his meeting with Bob Lazar and some of the things that Lazar told him and some of the stories that just don't align, where there's also other problems. And I'll touch on that a little bit also in a minute. But this is the most interesting part, is that in Bob Lazar's calendar is an entry for watching UFO Cover-Up Live on October 14, 1988. And I've covered this before. I talked about this, I think, in just a couple shows ago, maybe the last show too, because this is a really important point, that the first time the idea of aliens at Area 51 was introduced to the public was on this television show, UFO Cover-Up Live. It was introduced by a person that was blacked out and using the code name Falcon. Turns out this was Richard Doty, a former U.S. Air Force OSI agent who had just left the OSI, who had been feeding the UFO community disinformation for many, many years. And the very first document that he shared with the public that he said is false and is disinformation said Roswell craft and aliens were taken to Area 51. There's a group overseeing all this called Majestic 12, amongst a lot of really other crazy claims that NASA was observing, the alien situation, all of these wild claims that he says were false to cover up actual top secret things that were going on at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. So, but this Doty guy's just been talking about all kinds of crazy lies and everything for many, many years. He finally gets a chance, goes on this show, talks about wild stuff like aliens taking over Area 51, battles with the military, and, you know, the aliens loving strawberry ice cream, just this really crazy stuff. Bob Lazar watched that TV show in 1988, and he documented that and spoke to that and has admitted to that. Why is that interesting? Because just a few months later, he comes out claiming that he worked at Area 51 and he saw all of these crash craft and he was told about aliens, saw pictures of aliens, all kinds of crazy alien stuff that he can't substantiate that he heard on UFO Live cover-up. That's the link. So it wasn't even Bob Lazar who first released this alleged information. It was Richard Doty in documentation he says is false. Although these days, you know, he says it's real, he says it's false. Many, many reasons to doubt all of this information. But people believe it and they suck it up. And it gets worse. Because soon after that, Bob Lazar starts an illegal brothel. Now, he claims that he was set up and that, you know, it was just the government trying to get at him for coming up with these secrets. Totally false. These are the police reports. And the police reports clearly show that Bob Lazar approached prostitutes. At the time, apparently he's hanging out with prostitutes. And he had this idea to start up a brothel. He leases an apartment complex, two of them next to each other. One of them, he sets up camera and surveillance stuff so he can watch the prostitutes with their clients, supposedly to make sure that they're safe. And he eventually gets busted. It's all very well documented. He pleads guilty. For whatever reason, I was going to say unfortunately, because really it is unfortunate, he got off easy and he only had to do a few months of probation, whereas it was recommended that he go to jail for a period of time. But it's all right here. Bob Lazar getting busted for this brothel that he created right here in the police reports. Here's the case pre-sentencing report, and then here's the actual affidavits from the various witnesses, all of them saying it was Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar tried to say, oh, you know, they set me up and made it look like I started this whole thing, but I was just setting up their computers, setting up their faxes. It's not true. He set up this whole thing. He lied about that. And luckily he got off. But this is this is what? Let's look at the year here. 1990. And he had set up this brothel prior to that. So as he is getting this attention for being this incredible whistleblower, he is getting in trouble for setting up a brothel. Even worse, George Knapp goes to his trial where he's trying to claim, oh, they're just coming after me because I know about the aliens, and is a character witness for Bob Lazar. That's troublesome. I mean, you're a journalist who's supposed to be unbiased, and you're supposed to be evaluating the credibility of this witness, your star kind of witness and source to this these allegations of aliens at this secret base, and you're a character witness for this person, having known that he's lied at least about his, you know, educational background. That's a huge problem. And remember how I said it gets worse? It always gets worse. It gets worse because at this same time he's running this brothel, he is paid $30,000 by Robert Bigelow. So this is the problem. This is why these guys are not good sources of information. Robert Bigelow makes these claims. I know about aliens. If they don't believe me, I don't give a damn. He tells something similar to 60 Minutes. They make all these claims. Aliens are here. Aliens are there. Aliens are everywhere. And they're at Skinwalker Ranch. And there's Bigfoot and cattle mutilations and all this stuff going on. and they don't substantiate any of it, and they expect us to believe it, to the point where some of the people in this group are really aggressive with people who question them. And that's unfortunate too, because if you don't have any proof, it's okay for people to question you. I don't expect anybody to believe anything that I have where I don't have proof. That's why I bring receipts, like with this show, where others don't. Here's the receipts on this. So Robert Bigelow hires Bob Lazar. So problematic. And he gets screwed. He puts together a company. Let's see. They call this company the Zeta Reticuli 2 Corporation. $30,000, like I said, and he gets screwed. How? Because Bob Lazar didn't do anything he was supposed to. Here is Bigelow telling the story himself. And this is what's really funny, because this is an article from George Knapp in 2021 where he interviews Bigelow about Lazar, because all these rumors are coming out, Lazar screwed Bigelow, Lazar, even Jacques Vallée, another famous UFO researcher, talked about Bob Lazar claiming aerogel was from aliens or something like this. And Bigelow's like, no, he didn't do that. So essentially, this article is about Robert Bigelow clearing the air about Bob Lazar and saying, oh, no, he didn't do any of this stuff. And he talks about the aerogel. But at the end of the interview, to George's credit, he asked the most important question, and it's pretty shocking to me. So let's take a look here.
You went into business to build a certain device. He set him up in a small lab to see how he did, and then you split. After a while, you split up.
Yeah.
A lot of stories told about that. But
Yeah.
what's the bottom line for you?
I had a gal working for me that would check up on him, and I was out of town at the time, and she says, and so I said, okay, what's going on in the lab? And she said, well, I'm really sorry to tell you, it's being used as a little warehouse for furniture, And I thought, oh, geez, okay, I see the signs now. Okay, that's the end of it.
That he just wasn't doing what he said he would do. Yeah.
Correct. So
well, that sounds very Bob-like, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a storehouse, warehouse for him, because he had this furniture and no place to put it, I guess. Yeah, that was all.
Yeah. What? So there he is admitting that he screwed him, that Bob Lazar claimed he was going to do this stuff that he didn't do. What they're glossing over is that Bob Lazar was paid a large amount of money to do this work that he didn't do. Yet these guys go on believing his story. I mean, George is like, oh, that crazy Lazar. That sounds like Lazar. What? First of all, it should have been years ago that they should have realized that Bob Lazar was full of it and his credibility was zero. But this situation, it's just, at the very best, it just demonstrates that these people have a very low level of discernment. And that's their right. They can believe whatever they want. And I don't begrudge them that. But when you go try to tell the public that these things are real based off of no good evidence, claiming that you do have that evidence and you don't, that's wrong and irresponsible. It's irresponsible to frame this the way they do. And I mean, you can see Jeremy Corbell is very aggressive and he bullies people. And there's no getting around the fact that that's the truth. You saw him earlier bullying Stanton Friedman, this old guy. I mean, oh, you don't believe in this? He bullied me about this topic before. And I'll share this situation. So this was in his documentary, which ends with this amazing FBI raid. And they're like, oh my gosh, we don't know why the FBI raided us. It had to have been because they knew that we were talking about Element 115, this secret stuff. That was not true. It later came out that the police were raiding Bob Lazar because they believed he supplied some chemicals that one of his customers used to kill his wife. Now, it turned out, and I don't know how it turned out completely, but I believe that they were found out that Bob Lazar did not, supply this chemical. I don't believe he was guilty, but he wasn't found guilty, so maybe he wasn't. But it turned out they were told that by the police why the warrant was being served and why they were being raided. But Jeremy left that out. When that came out, because I try to report honestly, even when it's about friends or associates, I said, you know what? That was disingenuous. That was not framed correctly. And he came at me, why are you telling people I'm a liar? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, you weren't honest about this. And he said, well, I'm going to be. I was planning on telling people. I'm going to tell people this week. He never told people. He has not once admitted to this, that they knew why they were getting raided. I mean, you could even frame it if you believe this, that, well, they said it was for this reason, but we think it's actually for that reason. That's totally fair. But to lie, really, and say, I didn't know why they raided us when they absolutely did know. Even Bob Lazar's assistant had admitted that they did know why they were being raided. It's just false and it's irresponsible. So this is why I don't trust what comes from these people's mouths. And I don't believe that they're liars. I don't believe they're all liars. Some of the people I've just mentioned, I do believe they're liars. We've caught them in lies. But I don't believe like George or Bob Bigelow or some of these others are liars. I think they're sharing what they believe. But the problem is they're telling people this is absolutely real and we've got the evidence, and they don't have the evidence and they don't substantiate what they have. And they are really informing people by covering up. What I covered now is about a mountain of red flags, and it's not even all the red flags out there during this case, but they have not reported on any of this, none of this, except for the education part. And luckily, we have Bigelow admitting that Bob Lazar lied to him and screwed him over on this company that they had created. At the same time that this Zeta Reticuli company was created and supposed to be going on, Bob Lazar is setting up a brothel, an illegal brothel in Las Vegas, for which then he tries to blame the prostitutes for doing it when it was all him. And they all were like, he's the one who approached us. He hired us, over and over and over again. So it's very, very problematic. And if you want to read more about the problems, let me add one more about this group, because Bob Bigelow, the big guy when it came to Bigelow Aerospace and OSAP, he hires Bob Lazar. Wild. How could he do that? I don't understand when there's all these red flags and problems. And he pays for it and gets screwed over. Hal Puthoff, who's the lead scientist for Bob Bigelow when it comes to his paranormal research, hired Richard Doty, the OSI agent who admittedly lied to everyone and has been caught since then in lie after lie after lie. Hal Puthoff, the lead scientist for OSAP, hired him. And these are the guys that Grush worked with, David Grush worked with, the alleged whistleblower. These are the guys who worked with the UAP task force guys. This is why I'm skeptical of everything that they have to say. And unless they can prove it, I'm not going to give it a moment of time. I'm not going to give it consideration, because I've been living through this and working with these guys for now decades. And it's been the same story over and over and over again. Like I said, and I don't mean to be cruel, but it's absolutely the truth. They fall for every UFO hoax and trick out there. We saw it last week with Lou Elizondo and this photo he just got. We've seen it with Lou falling for other hoaxed or at least misrepresented videos and pictures. We've seen that from Jeremy Corbell when he hasn't even admitted, when a lot of, if not most, if not all of his stuff has been debunked. They're typically either misrepresenting or misinterpreting information. I think many of them are honest mistakes, but if there's someone who continually makes honest mistakes, are you going to trust them? Is that going to be a trusted team member? I don't think so. And like I said, really take a look at these links, because there's more and more that is out there. So for instance, a lot of people talk about, well, Bob Lazar has been so consistent with his story over the years. Absolutely false. Here's the Medium article that Signal Intelligence has put together, which just shows him changing his story over and over again, getting the facts and the details and everything wrong, even the technical details about the science, just many, 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 many examples. If you read this site, if you read The Other Hand, which was put together by Tom Mahood, you've got a lot of the same. And that doesn't even get into the science and how the science is wrong and the science doesn't work. Element 115, it's been theorized for a very long time before Bob Lazar was even born. He didn't find or discover element 115. He said, oh, there's probably this one element 115 that has X, Y, and Z properties. He was completely wrong because now they have manufactured element 115 and it doesn't have the properties that he said. Instead, it's got the properties in which scientists predicted it would have. And the reason why people like Stanton Friedman and even another one of the scientists that works with OSAP and Bigelow, Eric Davis, is very skeptical of Bob Lazar because they say that he just doesn't have the science right. So that's the Bob Lazar story. That's the secret. I'm going to write an article up on this too, so you can have that as a reference at our post at openminds.tv. But until then, I'll put all of these links in the show notes so you can have the true secret history. And it's almost like a crime story, right? It's almost like these real crime true stories because it's just so wild and crazy, all of the stuff that happened. But this is why I am absolutely justified, and anybody is absolutely justified in being skeptical of Bob Lazar, because the red flags just go from here to the top of the Empire State Building. There's a lot of them. All right, so enough of that, and now let's take a look at some videos from Enigma Labs. All right, these are the Enigma Labs videos of the week that I really like, and we'll also look at some that I've reviewed before, at least one where I think I figured it out, or at least some of the commenters think they figured it out. Remember, when we look at these videos, I always say that I expect them to get debunked, even the ones that I think are mysterious, because, you know, that's the whole point, is somebody knows what's out there. And I like to post them, even if I take some heat for it, just because I would rather post it, have some people look at it, and educate myself and you all, so we can educate ourselves to figure out some of these things that people are mistaking for something mysterious when they're not. So let's take a look. So you might remember this one. This is from England, Rossendale. I think I showed this one last week, and I'll make this a big screen. But yeah, look at this guy. So it is this object, but 3 dots flying along, and it goes behind some trees, 3 illuminated dots. And a lot of people say they can see some wing flapping, and I think maybe they're right. But especially at the end here, I think that you can see some wings flapping. So I think that the people who commented that they're probably birds are probably right. Also, early on in the video, you know, the configuration changes because they're, you know, here where they are, all 3 in a row. But then the last one kind of catches up and goes past the second one, and then stays past it there for a while, even though they look like a triangle. Remember, any 3 dots, 3 points of light, are going to look like a triangle. So I think this one did turn out to be birds. They're probably right. And when we're investigating UAP, the big deal is that, you know, we're trying to rule out any prosaic explanations. And in this case, I couldn't rule out birds. And so I think it might be birds. So tell me what you think. If you disagree, that's great. I'd love to hear what you think. Here's another one, and I love sharing these because we get a lot of Starlink or SpaceX videos. A lot of them. There have been people online that, oh, people don't mistake those for UFOs. They absolutely do. Every single launch, I think we get at least some reports, but the videos are spectacular. And I can see why people would be confused, because these things look so cool. And don't be embarrassed. Please do submit these or anything cool you see in the sky. But I think I'm the one who named this a bright bow tie like light in the night sky. This is from the Oro Valley in Arizona, May 31st, 2024. I always do go check to make sure there was a launch that day, and certainly there was, and it was just prior. It was at 10:37 Eastern p.m., and this is Mountain Time at about 11 p.m., but this is likely the second stage, and it had gone around the planet at least once, because it's what I call the bow tie. Let's hear the audio. I don't even remember what the audio was like in this one. And you'll notice it's a bigger bow tie. So look at that. Absolutely extraordinary. So what's going on here is that it's outgassing. So when it spins, like we had not too long ago in this mode, then it's going to look like a spiral. But mostly they don't spin. And what it's doing is emitting all of the gas from the aircraft, the second stage, so that it can safely re-enter. They do that so it doesn't explode and create a lot of space debris. They outgas and they let all the gas out, and then that's reflected by the sunlight, because even though this part of the planet is in shadow, this object is so high in the sky that light can still hit it. And that's what makes these look so spectacular. That almost looks like something else. I'm not going to say what. And then it stops because it's pushed all the gas out. It's no longer really visible, and now it's just a tiny little dot like a satellite. So the reason it looks like a bow tie is because gas is being pushed out on both sides, and so it creates these clouds on both sides. So it looks a bit like a bow tie. And for the listeners, this is at night, and it's always typical at night because it's night for the people, but the object is still reflecting sunlight. So that's why it looks so spectacular. So this one is Enigma 294118. Really interesting. Again, you can see all of these on the absolutely free app. I do work for Enigma. I'm a consultant with them where I look for these videos. I look at videos all day, every day, looking for the cool stuff. And that's why I share with you some of the cool things that I come across here. And here is another cool one. So this is kind of neat. Look at this crazy object. Let me full screen. So this one, so people know, is from Northridge, California, May 7th, 2025 at about 11 p.m. again. I call it, or the title for this is a large pulsing white lights moving side to side. The witness says, many people witnessed this object with pulsing lights. My camera didn't really do it justice, but the craft was far and it still looked big. The lights were white and pulsing from side to side. On camera, the lights were colorful. I don't know what that means. And what we can see on the video is, of course, it is nighttime, so it's dark out, but it is in a metropolitan area, so there's lots of light coming from the city. So it doesn't look completely dark because it's just lots of light from the community here. But what you see hovering over this neighborhood are like 3 or 4 lights, very, very close to each other. And they're just sitting there, not doing anything. So it is a really weird video. I'm not sure that you can see the lights going back and forth. Some of my thoughts were perhaps these are flares that were dropped by a military somewhere soon nearby. To be honest, I'm still not sure what this is. I think there is an explanation, so I'm really excited to hear some feedback from you all. But this is a really weird looking one. I'm going to turn up the audio here. Just hear some crickets. The witness is pulled over in their car. They're filming from their car. So I really love it that people pull over and take these videos when they see something they can't explain. But it is pretty weird. I'm not totally sure what it is, but I would imagine it has a mundane explanation. So that's a weird one. That's pretty cool. From California. That's Enigma number 313276. In fact, you'll find this on the content feed. So that tab on the left-hand side bottom left-hand side of the app. You'll be able to click that and see that one. And this one as well. So this one is from May 10th. This is New York, New York. That's where our offices are and where my colleagues are that I talk to every day at Enigma. Very cool colleagues. I got to say, and I'll say it again, and well, I've always been kind of a Pollyanna, I guess, but the people I work with are really cool. They're super intelligent, mostly younger, but I absolutely love working with all the Enigma people out of New York. And New York's just an exciting place, so I love to visit them as well. But that's what gets me so excited. I just think so highly of my colleagues at Enigma Labs. A really great group of people. But this video is from May 10th, just a few days ago, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, Enigma 313406. The description from the witnesses: I was walking my dog as usual. Again, another dog walker. People often see things when they walk their dog. I hope I do tonight when I walk the dog. But I was walking my dog as usual. The weather was cloudy and warm during this time of year in NYC. I decided to look up to find stars, but instead I see 4 yellow lights in the sky moving in weird directions, so I decided to take a video. One of them flew off in a fast pace. Now, we only see 3 lights in this video. It is night. You see 3 lights very vividly above the city there. They do look orangey, and maybe that will give you a clue for what some of you what I think it is. They are zooming in, and you can see a couple of lights very closely, and you can see a slight flicker, but they're very bright. But because of their orange color, and it's a very short video, it's only 23 seconds. And at the end of the video, one seems to be fading out, because I think most likely these are Chinese lanterns. Typically the orange orbs are. Now, some people disagree. I know there is at least one scientist doing a paper on orange orbs, but really, I have not seen an orange orb I did not think, to be honest, was Chinese lanterns, just because they move slowly, steadily. You can see the flicker. And this one, the flicker isn't as apparent, but you can see it. And then typically they fade out fairly quickly. And in this video, at the end, one does seem to be fading out. Still, very visually stunning video. And I could be wrong, so take a look and let me know what you think. It is a really cool video. I really do like this one. So yeah, that's another really interesting video. That is Enigma. I think I've already said it, but you can find it either by going to the website and typing in the URL, which is just enigmalabs.io/sighting/313-406. That's the Enigma number, 313-406, or downloading the free app, which is now available on iOS and Android. And we are constantly working on improving both. So we really got Android out as quickly as we could. It had a little bit less functionality than the iOS version, but we're quickly changing that. And just because they're different platforms, the Android one's looking really cool. It's they're doing some really great jobs on upgrading that one, but they're both really cool and absolutely free. So why not go to enigmalabs.io? There's a link where you could get to download, or go to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store and download those. So thank you so much for joining me on this show. We will likely next time have Jason McClellan back, my old partner and old school buddy and partner. We're both old, I guess, but my buddy who I worked with Open Minds for so many years, and he's going to be doing a deep dive on this Immaculate Constellation alleged whistleblower witness. So he's going to break that down and go over that with us to inform us, what to look out for when it comes to that testimony. So that's going to be great. But thank you all so much for joining me. Until next time, adios, muchachos.